The automatic doors slid open as my son guided me toward the counter, the sharp smell of disinfectant mixing with the cold air from outside. I felt steady enough on my feet, but the weakness lingered the way it does when you're past 70 and recovering slower than you'd like. He set my prescription bag on the counter with a quick tap, urging the pharmacist to check it sooner. Something in his pushiness tightened the back of my neck. The pharmacist scanned the bottles, her eyes moving faster than her hands. She paused suddenly, the kind of pause that tells you something is wrong before a single word is spoken. She lowered her voice and leaned in just enough that only I could hear. "Sir, this isn't your medication." The words were flat, simple, and carried a weight that made my fingers curl against the counter. It wasn't the tone of someone correcting a small mistake. It was the tone of someone warning me. She turned one of the bottles, tapping the label lightly. The dosage was well above anything I'd ever been prescribed, and the drug name wasn't one I recognized. My chest felt tight as I looked from the label to her eyes, trying to make sense of how something so dangerous could end up in my bag. She didn't look confused. She looked concerned. When I glanced toward the doorway, my son was already watching us. His stance was too stiff, too alert, as though he'd been waiting for the moment something didn't go according to plan. The instant our eyes met, he stepped forward, closing the distance between us with a forced smile that didn't touch his eyes. He asked if there was a problem before the pharmacist could say another word. She kept her voice low and steady, asking if someone else had been picking up my prescriptions lately. The question struck harder than I expected. I opened my mouth to answer, but my son moved closer, cutting off the space between us. He insisted everything was correct, his tone gentle but firm, like he was soothing a misunderstanding rather than addressing a warning. The pharmacist didn't argue. She simply held my gaze a second too long, her expression saying more than she was allowed to speak. She slipped the bottles back into the bag with deliberate care, as if touching something fragile or dangerous. The bag felt heavier when she handed it to me, as though the plastic hid something more than pills. My son guided me toward the exit with a hand on my shoulder, speaking calmly about schedules and routines, but the words barely reached me. The cold outside air hit my face as we stepped out, and for the first time, the simple act of carrying medication felt like carrying a threat. Something inside that bag was wrong, and someone wanted me to take it. I sat in the passenger seat as my son drove us home, the prescription bag resting against my thigh like a reminder I couldn't ignore. The silence between us felt thicker than usual, and I kept my eyes on the passing buildings to keep my thoughts steady. Recovery after my last health scare had been slow, slower than I wanted to admit, and the house had never felt as empty as it did after my wife passed. Grief sneaks up on a man differently when he's older, quiet at first, then heavy enough to shape the days without asking permission. My son stepped in more after that. At first, it felt like kindness. He brought groceries without being asked, handled chores I didn't have the strength for, and insisted on driving me to appointments even when I said I could manage. I appreciated the help, or at least told myself I did. When you're alone long enough, any hand offered feels like something to hold on to. But his involvement grew in ways that made me pause. He started taking over small tasks, calling the clinic for refills, speaking to receptionists before I reached the counter, answering questions meant for me. His wife joined in soon after, always suggesting stronger treatments, new prescriptions, faster solutions to get me back on my feet. She said it with a brightness that never matched the seriousness of the decisions she pushed toward. I noticed the changes first through the medication itself. Some doses felt stronger, leaving me more tired than usual. Pills I'd taken for years suddenly made my skin flush or my mind cloudy. I mentioned it once lightly, and my son told me aging bodies react differently. He said it with such confidence that I believed him, even though something in my gut resisted the explanation. Still, trust is a stubborn habit when it's built over decades. I kept quiet, convincing myself I was imagining things. I reminded myself he was my son, that he had no reason to harm me. He'd grown up watching me work, learning from me, relying on me. It felt wrong to question someone who once looked to me for everything. But today, the pharmacist's whisper cut through that trust like a clean slice. "This isn't your medication." The words replayed in my mind, reshaping every small discomfort I had brushed aside. Her concern shed new light on all the subtle red flags, unexpected side effects, unexplained refills, stronger pills that left me unsteady for hours. By the time we pulled into the driveway, doubt had formed a quiet, cold space inside my chest. My son held the door open for me, smiling like nothing was wrong, but now the smile looked different. The help that once felt comforting had begun to feel like something else entirely. Something I needed to understand before it was too late. When I got home, I placed the prescription bag on the kitchen table and sat for a moment before opening it. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own hesitation. I pulled out each bottle and lined them up in a straight row, reading the labels slowly the way the pharmacist had. The numbers didn't match what my doctor had told me. The dosage was higher, and one bottle listed a strength I knew I'd never been prescribed. My breath steadied into something tight as I checked them again, hoping I was misreading. My son walked in just as I was comparing 2 bottles. He glanced at them and shrugged, saying he had asked for extra strength refills because I needed something more effective to speed up recovery. He said it casually, almost proudly, as if he'd done me a favor without bothering to mention it. I didn't respond right away, and the silence seemed to annoy him. He picked up a bottle, shook it lightly, and told me not to worry so much. His wife joined us a moment later, catching the tone of the room before I said a word. When I asked why the dosages were different, she stiffened. She accused me of not remembering what the doctor ordered, her voice edged with irritation. She spoke like someone offended by even a gentle question, as though asking for clarity was an attack. The reaction didn't match the situation, and it narrowed something in my mind. After they left the kitchen, I continued sorting through the packaging. That was when I spotted a rolled-up sticker in the trash bin beside the counter. It looked like a prescription label, creased from being peeled off. When I unrolled it, my stomach dropped. The name wasn't mine. It belonged to someone I didn't know, and the medication listed was a completely different drug. Someone had covered that label with a new one, my name plastered over another patient's prescription. Later that afternoon, during a scheduled check-in call, I asked a nurse about the medication changes. She hesitated before telling me that someone had called earlier that week pretending to confirm an increased dosage. The uncertainty in her voice told me she suspected something didn't add up, but she couldn't say more without crossing a line. That evening, my son brushed off every question with growing irritation. He blamed clerical errors, system issues, miscommunication, anything that kept the focus off him. His explanations came too quickly, too neatly, and none of them settled the heaviness forming in my chest. After he left, I pulled out a small notebook from the drawer beside my bed. I wrote down every change, every odd moment, every contradiction. I didn't know where this was leading yet, but I knew enough to start documenting the truth before it slipped through my fingers. I waited until the next morning before calling the clinic, asking for the earliest appointment I could manage on my own. My son had already left for work, and that small window of independence felt more important than anything else that day. When I finally sat across from my doctor, he greeted me kindly, unaware of the weight I carried in my pocket. The notebook filled with notes I never expected to write. I placed my current prescriptions on the desk and asked him as evenly as I could whether he had changed any of my dosages. He barely needed a second glance before shaking his head. His answer dropped like a stone in my stomach. He turned to his computer and pulled up my chart. As he scrawled, a line of tension formed across his brow. Several attempted dosage changes had been entered, then blocked by system alerts. Someone outside the clinic had tried to alter my medication plan more than once. He didn't speculate or dramatize. He simply showed me the timestamps and denied approving any of it. That quiet certainty did more to alarm me than any raised voice could have. On the way out, I stopped by the pharmacy window to ask a question I wasn't sure how to phrase. The young pharmacy tech recognized me from past refills and leaned closer when I asked whether anyone had inquired about stronger substitutions for my medication. Her expression shifted immediately. She admitted that a caller, claiming to be a family representative, had asked whether certain sedating alternatives could be used. She thought the request sounded unusual but couldn't deny it without the doctor's say so. Hearing it confirmed broke open something I'd been trying to contain. That afternoon, my son arrived with a folder in hand. He said he needed me to sign a medical release form so he could communicate more clearly with my doctors. His tone was smooth, practiced, almost gentle enough to hide the pressure behind it. When I told him I wanted to read it later, a flicker of frustration crossed his face before he smothered it with a smile. He left the folder on the table like a test I wasn't ready to take. Not long after, I overheard my daughter-in-law telling a staff member over the phone that she would be making decisions soon. Her confidence was unsettling, as though she believed authority was already in her hands. The certainty in her voice wasn't concern, it was control. Before the day ended, I used the clinic's patient portal to print every log the doctor had shown me. I folded the pages neatly and hid them inside a book no one ever touched. The stack of evidence was growing faster than my doubt could keep up. This wasn't confusion or clerical error. It was coordination, carefully planned and quietly executed. That evening, I followed my usual routine, trying to reassure myself that fear wasn't going to dictate my life. I filled a glass with water, set it on the counter, and opened the pill organizer my son had arranged earlier. The capsules looked the same as always, and for a moment I hesitated, wondering whether caution had finally tipped into paranoia. I took them anyway, swallowing them with slow gulps. Within minutes, a wave of dizziness washed over me so forcefully I had to grip the counter to keep myself upright. The room blurred at the edges, the floor shifting under my feet like it couldn't decide where to settle. I sank into a chair, breath shallow, waiting for the world to steady. When it finally did, my hands were cold and trembling. I hadn't felt that kind of disorientation since before my treatment began. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. The next morning, I called the clinic and asked to speak to my doctor. He reviewed the medication I had taken, studying the pills I brought with me. His expression darkened with each bottle he examined. He told me plainly that these were not the pills he prescribed. Different manufacturer, different strength, different purpose altogether. 3 of them weren't even meant for my condition. His calm voice couldn't hide the seriousness behind the words. When I returned home, I searched the kitchen for answers. I checked drawers I hadn't touched in weeks and found a small paper bag tucked behind a stack of unused placemats. Inside were bottles matching the ones I'd been given, along with empty containers for the prescriptions I was supposed to be taking. It wasn't a mistake or a mix-up. Someone had swapped them, and they had hidden the evidence like a secret they never planned to reveal. My son came by later, and when I mentioned the dizziness, he brushed it off as normal side effects. He didn't even look concerned, just annoyed that I brought it up at all. His wife joined in, blaming the doctor for outdated prescriptions and insisting they would handle future visits themselves. The way they spoke over me, moving decisions out of my hands, made my stomach tighten in a way dizziness never could. That night, as I headed down the hall, their voices drifted from the living room. I paused, listening. "We need to get things done before he worsens," my daughter-in-law said. My son didn't argue. Their words weren't filled with worry. They were filled with intent. The truth settled over me with a cold finality. My health wasn't slipping on its own. Someone was pushing it down. I asked for a private appointment the following morning, wanting to speak to my doctor without my son hovering nearby. He closed the door behind us and pulled up a chair, sensing the seriousness before I said a word. I handed him the bottles I had taken the night before, then the copies of chart logs I'd printed. His eyes moved between the papers and the screen with a focus that made the room feel smaller. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. My medication history had been altered more than once, and none of those changes had come from him. He scrolled deeper into the logs, tracing timestamps and flagged entries. Several attempts had been made to adjust dosages remotely, attempts that were denied only because the system blocked unauthorized access. Seeing those entries on the screen tightened something in my chest. They weren't guesses or vague impressions. They were digital fingerprints left by someone trying to change my treatment behind closed doors. My doctor pushed his glasses up, studying the patterns like someone assembling a puzzle they didn't want to complete. Then he explained something I hadn't considered. He'd seen similar behavior in cases involving elder coercion, family members trying to influence medical decisions by manipulating prescriptions, altering routines, or pushing for unnecessary treatments. His words landed with the weight of certainty, not speculation. He recommended bringing in a patient advocate immediately, someone trained to track interference and ensure my care stayed in my hands, not someone else's. The advocate met us in a small side room a short time later. She listened carefully, her expression sharpening as she reviewed the logs. She placed a call to the pharmacy and then to the clinic's administrative line. When she returned, she carried a seriousness that made my pulse slow. Multiple calls had been made under my son's name, calls requesting stronger medications, asking about mixing sedatives, and inquiring about quicker refills. None of the requests matched the doctor's orders. She sat forward and explained the danger in clear, steady terms. If a family member pushes hard enough, they can try to obtain medical power of attorney by claiming the patient is confused or unable to manage their care. Once that authority is granted, decisions shift out of the patient's control. Hearing the possibility spoken aloud made the floor feel unsteady beneath me, more than any dizziness ever had. I thanked them both, even though the words felt small compared to what they had revealed. When I left the clinic, the sun outside felt harsher than usual, as though it exposed more than it warmed. I wasn't walking into uncertainty anymore. I was walking toward a confrontation that could no longer be avoided. I began planning that moment carefully, choosing preparation over panic and truth over fear. I spent the next day choosing my words carefully, rehearsing them in the quiet of my living room. By evening, I called my son and asked him and his wife to stop by so we could review my health plan together. My voice stayed steady even though something colder sat beneath it. They agreed quickly, too quickly, as if the idea suited a plan they were already moving toward. When I hung up, I placed the printed logs, altered labels, and swapped pill bottles in a neat stack inside my desk drawer. I wanted everything within reach when the moment came. Before they arrived, I coordinated with the doctor, the advocate, and the pharmacist. They waited in nearby rooms at the clinic, ready to step in when needed. The arrangement felt clinical and heavy, but it gave me a sense of ground beneath my feet. It wasn't about catching anyone in a dramatic scene. It was about staying protected while the truth surfaced in plain sight. When I locked the papers into a folder, the weight of it felt like a shield. My son walked in first, carrying a look of forced concern that didn't match the quickness of his steps. He scanned the room like he expected shortcuts, not conversation. His wife followed with a folder of her own, her lips set in a line too thin to pass for patience. They barely sat down before he started talking about how confusing things had been lately, suggesting again that letting him handle decisions would be simpler for everyone. The push in his voice wasn't gentle anymore. It carried an urgency he wasn't trying to hide. His wife leaned forward, sliding a medical release form across the table. She encouraged me to sign it tonight using a tone that pretended to soothe but landed like pressure on my skin. She listed reasons: efficiency, reduced stress, smoother coordination, none of which had anything to do with my well-being. She kept glancing at the door, as if she expected someone to interrupt or object. The impatience sat under every word she spoke. I kept my breathing even, letting them talk, letting them reveal more than they intended through the quickness of their demands. My hand rested casually on the folder in my lap, feeling the hard edge of the evidence inside. The room felt smaller as silence settled between their pushes. My son's knee bounced. His wife tapped her pen. They weren't calm. They weren't confident. They were waiting for a signature that would shift everything. When the pharmacist stepped briefly into view in the hallway, she caught my eye for a second, one quiet, steady look that reminded me of the whisper at the counter. It carried the same warning as before, only this time I wasn't confused. I was ready. The pressure in the room thickened as the moment edged toward truth, closer than any of us were acknowledging aloud. I asked them to come with me to the clinic under the excuse of getting a quick check-in from my doctor. They followed without hesitation, still believing they were guiding the situation. My steps were slow but steady, and I didn't speak on the way in. The hallway lights felt colder than usual as I led them toward a consultation room at the end. My son kept glancing at the forms in his hand, while his wife whispered reminders about what I needed to finish tonight. I opened the door and stepped aside, letting them enter first. The moment they crossed the threshold, they stopped. My doctor sat at the small table, the patient advocate beside him, and the pharmacist nearby with her arms folded. None of them said a word at first. The silence hung heavy, sharper than anything I could have said. My son froze mid-step, confusion pulling at his expression, and his wife's confidence drained as quickly as air leaving a punctured balloon. They had not expected witnesses. They had not expected professionals waiting to hear the truth. I took a seat opposite them and slowly placed the folder on the table. My hand stayed steady as I opened it. One by one, I laid out the altered medication labels, the swapped pill bottles, the tablet with the call history logs, and the printed system entries showing attempted dosage changes. The room stayed painfully quiet except for the soft clicks of each item landing in front of them. My son swallowed hard. His wife's breath hitched as she leaned back, eyes darting toward the door. The advocate spoke first, her tone calm but unmovable. She explained that unauthorized dosage changes, impersonation in medical calls, and tampering with prescriptions were all serious violations. She detailed how each attempt was documented and traced. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every word landed like a weight on the table between us. My son's face paled as the reality of what these actions meant finally settled over him. His wife tried to interrupt, but her voice cracked. She started with a denial, then shifted to excuses, then finally slipped into the truth she had been holding in the dark. She said he was slowing down, that someone had to take control, and that a weaker patient made decisions easier to manage. Her words spilled out in pieces, each more revealing than the last. It wasn't rage, it wasn't theatrics, it was resigned exposure. My son stared at her, stunned. It was the first time I saw real fear in his expression, not for me, but for what he had allowed himself to be part of without understanding the depth of it. He looked at the evidence again, then at her, and something hollow settled behind his eyes. The truth lay between us, undeniable and cold, and there was no way back from it. The room emptied slowly after the confrontation, leaving only the advocate with me as I gathered the documents back into the folder. She stayed calm and steady, guiding me down the hall toward her office. My legs felt heavier than they had earlier, but I kept moving. Once we sat, she began filing the reports with a quiet efficiency that didn't require reassurance. She documented the unauthorized dosage changes, the impersonation on medical calls, and the attempted substitutions. Her voice stayed level as she confirmed the incidents would be recorded as elder abuse and medical manipulation. The pharmacy was next. The pharmacist took the altered labels and the mismatched bottles as evidence. She assured me that all access connected to my son or his wife would be revoked immediately. She typed quickly, removing their names from pickup permissions and locking my profile behind a stronger verification process. When she looked up, her expression held the firmness of someone who had seen similar cases before. It wasn't judgment, it was readiness to protect. At the clinic, the administrator updated my medical file with protective alerts. Any attempt to call, adjust, or request information under my son's name would now trigger verification and a report. My daughter-in-law's access was removed entirely, her previous involvement flagged in the system. The staff shifted almost subtly around me, their movements more attentive now. They spoke with a respect I hadn't realized I'd been missing until it returned. My son stayed silent during most of the process. He lingered by the reception desk, looking smaller than he had earlier in the day. When his wife was told she could no longer pick up or manage my medication, she stormed out, her steps sharp against the tile. He didn't follow her. He just watched the door close behind her and placed his hands on his knees, staring down. There was no shouting, no scene, only a slow erosion of whatever certainty he had held. Word traveled through the family faster than I expected. Some called with disbelief, others with thinly veiled denial. A few stayed quiet, avoiding the subject entirely. Not one person offered a simple apology. Their reactions only made the air heavier, but I didn't push for anything more. I didn't need answers from them anymore. When I reached home that evening, the silence felt heavier than usual, but clearer too. I sat at the table, sorting through my documents and placing each safeguard exactly where it belonged. The betrayal settled deep, but it didn't crush me. It reminded me that trust must be guarded, especially when age makes people think you've stopped paying attention. I closed the folder and locked it away, ready to protect what was mine with a steadier hand. The next morning started quieter than most. I sat at the edge of my bed, feeling the steady rhythm of my breath settle into something calmer. There was no rush from anyone, no pressure about schedules or pills. I moved through the house at my own pace, picking up the routines I had put aside when I thought I needed help. The kettle warmed, the lights came on, and the familiar sounds of my home returned like a slow reminder that I was still in charge of my days. I organized my medications myself, double-checking each label the way the pharmacist had shown me. The bottles sat in a clean row, simple and honest, without anyone else's hands interfering. It felt strange how such a small act carried so much weight. Vulnerability makes simple things feel dangerous, and I understood now how easily someone could twist that weakness for their own plans if you weren't paying attention. Trust, I learned, can be misplaced long before you notice it slipping. At the clinic, the doctor greeted me with a firm handshake and a nod that needed no explanation. His concern had been real, steady, and without judgment. The advocate's paperwork had already been processed, tightening the safeguards on my file. Their efforts gave me room to breathe, and I made a quiet promise to respect that gift by staying alert. I realized that independence isn't just living alone, it's understanding who has access to the details that keep you alive. When I stopped by the pharmacy later that week, the pharmacist met me with a small smile and a clear, careful rundown of every prescription. She treated me with a level of respect that felt restorative. Gratitude settled in my chest, grateful that she whispered when she did, grateful she noticed what I didn't. A few seconds of honesty from her had likely changed the course of my life. At home, I placed all my important documents in a locked drawer, sealed and organized. Boundaries became more than emotional lines, they became literal protections. I kept calls private, appointments clear, and access controlled. I didn't hate my son, but I no longer allowed him near the parts of my life that required absolute trust. Love and safety are not the same, and accepting that truth brought a kind of peace I didn't expect. As the evening settled, I sat by the window and let the quiet carry its own message. A man must guard his health the way he guards his name, with steady hands and open eyes. Because at the end of it all, your life is yours to protect, and no one else can do it for you.